In this episode, we're going to kind of join the conversation a little bit in the middle of things. Doyle and I had started a conversation in a sort of meta sense to talk about what the episode was going to be about. And in doing that, we kind of started engaging in a little more details around it. So I think we're going to pick up here where Doyle is talking about, kind of a balance. And I think we get really the tail end of this, but the balance of views where some individuals look at things purely from a very rationalistic science type of a view, the scientific mind, which is not negative, just that some people do that in extremis and to the exclusion of considering other sources of information that may not be scientifically testable, scientifically provable, but have usefulness in life. And then also the other side of that as well, those who discount the necessity and the value of that rationalistic approach to understanding things and to starting to come to know information and to know things that are approximating truth. And we talk a little bit more about that, I believe, in the podcast as well. So just to give you that preface, we are kind of in the middle of that as the recording did not begin until I realized that we were deep in the topic itself. So I hope that you enjoy, and I hope that you find this beneficial.
Versus just a clump of cells, right?
Right.
That just so happen to have formed a certain way and developed abilities and capabilities and things of that sort, different than other forms of life.
Well, and when it all comes down to it, it's like meaning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that you want to? People want to use the word God. People don't want to use the word God. Whatever. But the reality is, if you don't have some sort of connection to a transcendent meaning, then you are on the path to nihilism. And then at that point, it's like, why are you doing anything? Like literally, because like even a nihilist doesn't really care about hedonistic experience, right? I mean, now maybe you do, but then how much are you a nihilist, or are you just a pure hedonist, right? And so I think that both nihilism and hedonism are detrimental to, and forget about society, forget about all humanity, but just talk about the individual. I think that nihilism and hedonism are ultimately detrimental to even the concept of the individual, because what you're doing, you're just saying, I don't want to be me, right? Because like I don't want this, or because there's no reason for this. That's the nihilist, or I don't want this. I'm always trying to escape this. That's the hedonist. And so it's very interesting where people want to I think about the militant atheists, right? And I don't want to say all atheists, because some atheists are plugged into other transcendent meaning. And I think that what they don't understand is they're really tapping into the concept of God, and they have such a distaste for the word God that they don't want to use it. But like the real militant atheists, like anti-Christian atheist, anti-religion atheist, is a person who has been so stripped of their own personal power for so long that they've realized that, I can say this and nobody can stop me. They're starting to touch that power, but they're touching it in a perverted way. And I don't mean it from the sense of they shouldn't be allowed to say that or do that. I mean it from the sense of it's not useful for them to be taking that perspective. It's a waste of time, literal waste of time. It doesn't make their life better, and it doesn't make the people who they're targeting life better. The only person it may make life better in the very short run is the other people who are in that echo chamber with them, and they're like, yeah, when they get that reinforcement. But only for that period of reinforcement does it do any kind of positive, quote unquote, at all. And now the episode proper. All right, so this episode, we're going to start things a little bit differently than normal. As you heard earlier, we were talking a little bit before we got started, and so topics were really unfolding, so we're just going to kind of roll with that today. And so kind of what we got to talking about is having meaning in one's life and letting that kind of drive what they do, and how much that I think most people are driven by some meaning, and I think this may be the real meat of what we talk about. Most people are driven by some meaning, even if they're like fully unconscious of that meaning. And it's really interesting when to see, or maybe I should say, it's interesting to see how people behave when they're under the influence of unconscious meaning. And the reality is, and this is kind of the scary part of it, that when people are operating according to an unconscious meaning, then they are usually unaware when a third party replaces that meaning with some other meaning, yet they still continue to follow this unconscious transcendent, or this unconscious meaning, I should say. And I think that a lot of, and this is me speaking my perspective now, a lot of that, let's say, faculty of following meaning is very conducive to positive human ends when we become conscious of what that meaning is, and even more so when we decide what that meaning's going to be and be conscious of what that meaning is and let that drive us. And I would say most powerfully is when we consciously decide for that meaning to be something transcendent. So meaning something beyond us, beyond just necessarily what's best for us in our life. Maybe that's better for society. Maybe that's better for the world. And you have to be careful when you do that, I think, because I think a lot of people are like that and want to do that. But then they take action starting on the outside instead of starting on the inside, right? It's like, you have to build out, right? You have to make yourself strong, and then you have to make those around you strong, and then you have to make those a little farther out around you strong, and then out. And then you very rarely can you focus directly on any more than those first 2 or 3 levels, right? I think that's something like yourself, your family, your community, or maybe it's yourself, your family, a group within your community, like maybe a religious organization or a civic organization, and then your full community. And then at that point, it starts getting a little fuzzy. I mean, like in the United States, your state or the country, world, there's very little, I think, that you can do directly. And that doesn't matter who you are. I mean, even if you're the president of the United States, I still think there's very little you can do to fundamentally change the world. But you can do things that have the effect of eventually changing the world. But you can't focus on wanting to change the world. So we can talk a little bit more in detail about that in a little bit. But I think that it bears some unpacking, this idea that almost all human activity is driven by some meaning, whether conscious or unconscious meaning. And if it's not, we could talk about what we think that looks like, and not to say that we're going to hit everything, because I think that we all have blind spots about some stuff, but I think it'd be an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, I think you're right. And one thing I'll add to what you said about, people, they act and they exist based on some meaning they've embraced.
Yeah.
And whether it's subconscious or conscious. But the thing I want to add is, it's really key that this kind of gets into something we've talked about in the past about truth, about genuineness of what they believe, right?
Yeah.
Or what that influence is. The scary part, and this is you alluded to it earlier, or you mentioned earlier, about third parties can sometimes can swap out, unbeknownst sometimes to the individual, some and it's not the word you use, but some ulterior, some false, some manipulative meaning, or at least not the meaning, but a substitute for what the individual believes is the meaning, and they can be manipulated. So I think it behooves the person, the individual, and this is something you've talked about before, that it begins with the individual. It has to, right? It has to inside out, because you can't be external. You got to be internal,
Right.
and then what hopefully what you're revealing is the revelation of that internal truth. Truth being absolute, not what your truth and my truth or someone else's truth. I mean, that's a belief. That's not necessarily truth. Truth is, regardless of whether we believe it or not, it exists. It is provable, or it's existential. And I think that's the thing that people don't spend enough time thinking about it, right? And so they go through, a lot of people go through this existence we call life, living out a belief or a meaning that may not be true, right? And that's scary. And I think the mission, the purpose is to establish the truth and then find meaning from that. And then I think that's where we get into this whole discussion of uh, uh, what people would call faith, religion, spiritual being, and things of that sort. And that's where a lot of people have different, we've talked about, have different perspectives and even different emotions based on it. Some people, you've used the term that they're I forget what term you use, but it's some atheists. They don't believe in a God, but it's more the concept of the God that they don't believe in, right? That how it's been portrayed to them,
Right.
not necessarily the truth of a thing called God, or a thing that people call God, or I even hate to call it a thing, but a meaning that is called God,
Right.
and they sort of dig heels in rather than necessarily searching for the truth or the genuineness of it, and then finding meaning connected or related around what they determine to be genuine, right? Obviously, we have our human nature. When I talk about truth versus perspective or opinion, I get it. That I believe truth is absolute, but my perception of what that truth means is going to influence how I internalize it, right? Just like any individual. So,
or express it even. I mean, and it doesn't mean that it's an untrue expression either. It's just you're kind of mixing your personality with stuff. You're mixing your perspective. You're mixing your experience, and this is why I think, and this going back to something we've said before, or I know I have, and I'm fully certain you believe this too. That's why the individual is so important and so valuable, is that mixing of who they are with the truth is what gives us the ability to understand truth at a deeper level, right? Because we can't understand, our ability to understand something is limited by our ability to perceive. And our one individual's ability to perceive is not the same as another individual's ability to perceive. So the more of us that can perceive truth, the more we know about truth. It's not that truth changes, it's that our understanding of truth deepens. And that is so important. And I think, and people realize this in the scientific world, right? That's why you have, dozens of teams trying to replicate the same, not trying to replicate, doing the same experiments to see if they replicate the same results, right? Because the more that you do that, what you could do is you could find the cross section across all of those results and say, okay, well, this is something we've learned. This is always happening, right? So this is the way we're finding truth in that sense. Well, it's the same way when it comes to things outside of science. When it comes to what's how is a successful way to live, or whatever you mean by success, right? Success doesn't have to be monetary success. It could be all kinds of different success. When you have multiple different people, this is why I think it's so beneficial for if you want to achieve something in life, try to find as many people as you can who've achieved it, and see what they say that they do and how they approached it. And what you'll do is you'll have some sort of residual or cross section across all of that is the same. And that's what you need to be doing, right? Because that's the truth in how they got to where they are. Not to say that the other part's untrue. That doesn't mean that at all. But what that means is that is the objective, like indisputable truth, right? Yeah. And so I think it's important for us to understand that that doesn't mean that it changes truth. That my truth is different than your truth. What that means is my perspective is different than your perspective, and here are the things about truth that we're seeing, right?
Right.
It's a subtle difference, but it's an important difference.
Oh, I think it is absolutely crucial especially in present times. And I know we've in our discussions we've endeavored very, very diligently to not politicize things. And I want to make a statement that probably is going to sound like it's political, and I don't mean it to be. I mean I mean it to be just representing an observation. When we talk about science, right, and in today's time, with the political climate and environment that we find ourselves in, a lot of people are saying, well, just follow the science. And on both sides of or on all the spectrum of the political thing. So I'm not really talking political. But what you described, and I read an interesting article this morning. So I think that some of these things happen for a reason, right? This article I encountered had to do with science, and it was not related to the circumstances that we're currently living within around the world with the pandemic and COVID-19 and all that. It was more just a general article about science and research. Actually, it was about this research that Harvard did about happiness, a 75-year study or something like that.
Yeah.
But
note a 75-year study. We'll talk about that later.
Right. And it talked about how even true science understands that you begin with assumptions.
Yeah.
Right. So science isn't truth. Science is just a method to pursue truth. Does that make sense? That was
Totally.
what I gleaned from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think a lot of times people ascribe absoluteness. They ascribe truth to certain things that they have faith in, and that's understandable. But I don't think they're one and the same. They're not equivalent. And I think what you described just a few moments ago is absolutely how I perceive, that truth. Truth is indisputable. You can't disprove truth.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean you can't do something that makes it look like it's disputable or disputed. But then that just tells you that begins with an assumption, like science, and science has to have, studies have to be repeated, double blind and independent.
But even then, this is the thing that so and I'm gonna wave a little bit of a flag, and I don't have a lot of authority to wave this flag, but I have at least some. And again, as always, anything that I say or claim, I'm happy to have an open conversation, recorded public conversation with anybody about this. Even science does not prove anything. This is what people need to understand. Science never proves any. Okay, science in the sense like what you're talking about. Now, if we're talking about something more strict, like mathematics, if you want to call mathematics a science, some people do, some people don't. I understand that. Yes, you can prove things in mathematics, but then again, to your point, it's still based on your assumptions. Every mathematical proof starts with assumptions. Now, maybe they're well-founded assumptions, right? Maybe they're assumptions that they themselves have been proven. Well, you can take that all back, right? That's the thing about mathematics is there's probably 2 to 5 different things that if you were able to disprove them, you could basically crumble all of mathematics.
Plus one. If you could disprove that, then
that's not even true. I mean, that's only true for certain things. Right. So it's way more abstract than that even, which is weird to say to somebody who's not studied mathematics. But either way, I'm talking about things like you have to talk about literal space, like things like literal, what is a number? Where do numbers come from? That countability, how do you count? Things like that. So anyway, but my point being though, let's set mathematics aside. I'm talking more like, physics, chemistry, biology, all of those. And that's what's funny is like mathematics is like a language kind of. This is kind of how I view it. Mathematics is a language. And the farther you get away from that language, the less precise the truth, the things that you know from science. I won't say truth. The things that you know from science, the less precise that they are, right? So physics is really close to mathematics. So the things that we know from physics are pretty clear, except for when we get out fuzzy in the kind of theoretical stuff where people literally are just making stuff up and seeing if it fits, because that's what theoretical physics is these days. It's really terrible and trash, and let's talk about it if you think otherwise. But then you get out to like chemistry, which is like another kind of step from physics, and
It's still pretty clear because you can go into a laboratory and you can do stuff with chemicals and you can see what happens, right? And there's a whole language around that too of how to understand and interpret what's going on there. So that, yeah, there's some stuff there that's fuzzy too, but it's still pretty hard. But then you get out into like biology, and then it becomes like exponentially weirder because you have so many different things that interact that like it's hard to even calculate how many things are going on, let alone observe all of them, let alone observe how the interaction on these millions and maybe billions of different processes interact and cause different things to happen. But then you get even farther, and then you start getting into more of the soft sciences like psychology and sociology and all that. And it's like, yeah, to some degree that there's some structure there. But like you talk about a human's brain, like who knows what all is going on? We know we don't know, 10% of what's going on, 20% of what's going on with all of that. And so when people try to claim, that follow, like your statement that is clearly everywhere these days, follow the science. One, let's just put aside what I just said about that kind of fuzziness as it goes out from like mathematics. Follow the science. You can't do any realistic scientific studies in less than a year. Like you can do some stuff to approximate some things and make some guesses and get some early results and early understandings, but you're not doing full on science in less than a year. I'm sorry that you're bastardizing the word science if you say that you are or think that you are. And the thing is, they're just waving it around and be like, don't think, trust us. Right? We're giving you truth, right? And so they're trying to substitute their word as truth and not even actually going through the process that we have to best approximate it being, like in your words, I think true science, real science. And so that really upsets me as someone who used to consider himself somewhat of a scientist. I really don't anymore, not because of all of that, the political stuff, but mainly because I've lost interest in the things that are farther away from mathematics. I used to have a lot more interest than I do now, except for psychology. That's one that I still, because I think that there's a lot there that transcends this whole narrative of science versus belief, right? Because that psychology is superordinate to that, right? It has to be, because there's no concept of science or belief without psychology. Now, does that mean we know any more about psychology? Maybe not. I don't know. But there's a whole lot of literature that helps us get good results. And so that's almost as important as understanding the reality of the objective truth, I think.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point I'm trying to get to here is that people who don't understand what's actually going on in scientific research and how teams arrive at results, how teams are motivated to take on certain types of research, how multiple teams engage in the same experiments to try to duplicate or replicate, replicate results. If you don't understand at least some degree of all that process, then I mean, no disrespect by saying this, you have no basis to claim anything about follow the science or I'm doing what the science says. You don't know what the science is, and it's okay. You don't have to. You don't need to, but you also don't have to or need to use it as a billy club on people, right?
Well, I think it goes back to the point you made earlier, and I've already repeated it, that people, exist, they are based on some beliefs or belief system or meaning that they give to it. And then what you said was that people can substitute, because if people aren't certain what they believe, what their meaning is, something can be nefariously substituted in its place. And I think what we're talking about this here about science, using science as a club is an attempt to, it's used as a club directly, but it's also used as this nefarious, subtle way of, well, no one can dispute science because it's the truth, right? And that's one of the reasons why I brought that point up, is that I don't think science and the truth are the same. I think science tries to reveal truth, tries to
science attempts to be a light, right? That's what it's trying to be, is a light to say, okay, what can we find with this?
Right. Yeah. It in itself is not the truth. And that's the thing that I think is we're talking about we believe is or I believe is happening, or people are attempting to make happen.
So we have two problematic states that we're in right now with regards to this topic. One is we have the actors who are trying to be duplicitous, where they're trying to represent something as something that it's not, but it's something that people already align with, so they take it in and believe everything that falls back from that in their word. That's duplicitous, deceitful, and evil. And then the other part of it is people who and again, I don't mean disrespect by this, because we all do this to some degree or another. I just think that it's particularly dangerous, the things that people are doing about it now, which maybe that's always the case. Probably that's always the case. It's just we're so focused on it right now, thinking about it so much right now. And the problem is that people have a tendency to immediately believe this is. I'm going to. I'll state this, and then we're gonna have a laugh about it when I state where this comes from, with this articulation of it. People believe things that they either want to be true or are afraid are true, right? If I want this to be true, like I really believe that, I don't want to be too controversial with what I say here, but like if I really believe that standing 6 feet apart from somebody is going to keep me safe, if I want to believe that, and then somebody tells me, well, oh, look at this paper, it says that you're right, then I'm going to believe that, and I'm not going to read the paper. I'm just going to take it. I was right. I'm good. I got reinforced there. Or if I'm like, if I'm really afraid and I say, if I don't wear a mask, then I'm going to get sick. Because I'm afraid that I get sick and I die, right? Because I'm really afraid of that. And I'm not saying that that's an unreasonable perspective to have. I'm definitely not saying that. I'm just saying if somebody feels that way and they have that fear, and then somebody comes out and has a paper that says, look, you have a 99% chance of getting this virus if you don't wear a mask. Oh, you're right. Okay, I'm going to wear this mask. I know I was totally right. Then they don't even read the details behind it or anything like that. So
They
that's
trust the notorious they.
right. Well, wherever it comes from, right? It doesn't matter, because there's lots of places where all this is coming from.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that those things aren't reasonable to do and we shouldn't do those things. I'm definitely not saying don't wear a mask. Not saying don't stand 6 feet apart from each other. I'm saying we need to investigate things before we just accept them on their face. But what's really funny where that comes from is Wizard's first rule. That is Wizard's first rule. Like the Terry Goodkind books. So this is the Sword of Truth series. I've talked to you about them before. I've read these for a very, very long time. It's very interesting how he has a lot of human psychology and sociology built into his world, and that's a lot of what that whole series is about, and why I resonate with it so much. But that is Wizard's first rule. People will believe anything that they want to be true, or anything that they are afraid is true.
Right.
And it's so true, and it's so dangerous. That's the thing, is that people. It's almost like people just want to be in an echo chamber, and we see that proved out again in social media, because guess what? We have a whole lot of different echo chambers that get formed.
Sure.
And it's really hard, and this is something that I've tried to be very vigilant against, and have probably to some degree failed, and I'm trying to get better about it, is to stay out of echo chambers. Not saying don't associate with people who are clearly in an echo chamber, or don't, listen to them or watch them, but try to be intentional about stepping outside of that chamber as often as possible, and looking at things that contradict and counteract your perspective as often as possible. Not to take them in and accept them just as truth on their face, but to inspect them too. And you should inspect the things that come to you inside of any echo chambers you may find yourself in or near, without just accepting it on its face too. You should also read the detail behind that. And that's difficult, and that takes time, and that takes a lot of focus, and it takes a lot of energy, and that's why almost nobody does it.
It takes effort, energy, and it also takes responsibility and accountability.
That is the taking responsibility and accountability. Right. That action is doing that.
I know, but people are afraid of making decisions, afraid of taking a stance, making a stance, because of the perceived consequences, right? Sure. And but what they're not doing is weighing that against the consequences of not taking a stance and not inspecting and not being accountable and being responsible, right? They're looking at, it's easier to not do those things, when all it is it makes you a sheep, It makes you a sheep to the slaughter, right?
Well,
That
it's
people can lead you down a path that is not of your choosing.
right. I don't like the imagery of the sheep in the slaughter, not least of which because of that. I think that's generally distasteful. But even aside from that, I think that it's a little too inflammatory because of the context in which the sheep metaphor is used in society. And maybe you're not as plugged into that because I know you're not into social media and stuff as much as I am. When people talk about sheep, it's usually in a ironic way of using it as a derogatory way to address people who aren't trying to be aware of what they are. And so that's why I try to shy away from it. And I know you didn't mean it that way when you said it. So,
not in a social way, no.
But
although sheep are vulnerable.
I think
that's
yeah, I understand, but the thing is, and I'm going too hard on this, but that whole metaphor is an attempt to emotionalize the state of the truth of this thing, and I want to step back and talk about the truth. The truth is, you can't not make a decision, and this is, I think, was what you're saying. You can't not make a decision because to not do this thing is to decide to not do anything potentially, right? And if you do that, then just like you said, you're completely manipulatable, and you're going to follow whatever that emotion that hits you hardest, you're going to follow that. And that is usually whatever echo chamber you're already in this thing that comes to you, that's just like, oh, see here, reinforce what you already believe. The problem is very likely if you're the kind of person who makes the decision to not make a decision, then you've already taken this kind of a narrative from somebody else because you find yourself inside of this whole world where everything is framed to pull you into one narrative or another. And if you're not making the decision to take on that responsibility, to think for yourself, to do your own research, to really put into it, and it's understandable why one would not, because it's extremely difficult to do. I won't say it's extremely difficult. It's difficult to do. It takes a lot of energy, and a lot of energy that, you may not want to spend on that. Fully understand that. The thing is, you're probably not aware that you're getting sucked into a whole cadre of people. I won't say a flock, a cadre of people who are aligned in that same way and are not taking an active role in anything about the world. And here's the thing that I want to speak about that I don't think that many people do, because a lot of times when people talk about this topic like you and I are, especially kind of at the philosophical level that you and I are, people want to make a claim that like you need to change that. I don't think people need to change that at all. I think people just need to become aware that that's what they're doing. That's all they need to do. But the thing is, if people become aware 9 times out of 10, they're going to change it, because then they're going to feel disgraced. They're going to feel taken advantage of. They're going to feel upset that they find themselves there.
Which sort of ties it back to the comment I made earlier in this discussion, that they've examined the genuineness of the meaning behind their being, and how they're being and doing and thinking and feeling, and they are trying to approximate truth, trying to get closer to real truth, and obviously I think it's like perfection. You never get perfection, so you don't strive for perfection. You strive for excellence. Truth may not be fully realizable, but we try to approximate it by the genuineness of our discovery, the genuineness of our search, I'm trying to say it without using the word truth, but the genuineness, I guess, is the only thing I can keep coming back to. The genuineness of our efforts and the things that we encounter, and the gleaning of the things that
sincerity.
The sincerity. That's a great substitute word, a better word. The sincerity of what we're after, and then gleaning and cleaning out those things that aren't that, right? Because we'll encounter those things.
Oh yeah,
that's the hard part. Because one person may have, you have all these thoughts, these beliefs, these things that you thought were truth. And then when you dig into it, you realize, oh, that's not the case. This is not the case either. And so you have to self-inspect. You have to self-cleanse of those things that aren't supportive of what you're at. And that's tough. Like, as you said, it's hard to stop, to think, to evaluate, to filter, to remove and clean out those things that aren't supportive of sincerity and of genuineness toward truth.
And that is sin. those things that aren't. That is the definition of sin from my perspective. Sin's an archery term, right? To miss the mark, basically.
Right.
So you've missed the mark of truth. You've missed the mark of being who you are, who you're supposed to be, right? Because there is a you that you're supposed to be. And this is something that I think that a lot of people, if they could really realize this, if they could truly realize this, I think many people would rapidly change their lives. That you are not right now in this moment who you're supposed to be. There is a better version of you. And I bet you 100% of people listening to this and 100% of people who hear it know exactly what that better person looks like. Maybe not all of what that better person looks like, but at least one or two facets of what that better person looks like. And because you have that vision for what that better person looks like, that means you have work to do. You have things to discover. You have things to learn. You have things to change in your life to get you to be that position. And once you get to that position, you're going to have learned so much. Your mind is going to be open so much that you're going to have 5 more ways that you could be better. And then you've got to pursue those. And then again and again and again. And the person may ask, well, where does this end? It doesn't. That's what meaning is to become better. You can be better, so you must be better. And that's me, 100% me. Oh my goodness, I could list you 50 different ways that I could be a better person and that I am disappointed in myself that I'm not. And of those 50, I can name 45 that I'm not even taking the first step on and moving toward. And, and I've got to get better that way. If we could all regard our own life in that way, that's how you change the world. That's how you move the mountain, right? I mean, that is the miracle that you can work in your own life and in the world. It's unfathomable what we could achieve as humans if only 10% of us took that sort of approach to life.
So the point you made about that was the definition of sin is one of the most profound and moving things that I think I've ever heard you say. It rang so true when I heard you. I mean, you've used that term before about that's the definition of sin and missing. But I mean, in context of this conversation, I think you rang a bell with me that I think is super special, and I want us to get this shouted from the mountaintops, because I think that's. Most times when people talk about sin, they think in terms of sin being something that separates, and it does, from truth. But I think in context of the conversation we've had here, I think that description of sin is the lever to move away from and toward the truth, toward truth. And I think your description of because most people go, well, how? And I mean, and using Christian principles and practices, there is a path, right, to move from sin. But then that's just an emotional aspect to somewhat. I mean, it's a spiritual, emotional, and belief, but it's not an action. It's not necessarily an action. And what you just described is an action of moving away from sin. Anyway, I didn't mean to preach, and not trying to make this about Christianity per se, although I think it absolutely is. But that's not. I think it's also is applicable to any other belief system that anyone embraces as well.
Well, that's the thing, and this is where I come from on it. I think Christianity is a system that has a mechanism inside of it that can allow someone to move into truth and to realize the best person they can be. And that is the point of Christianity. That's the point of, I think, all religions, is for the individual. I think it's twofold, and maybe more than that, but certainly two things. One, for the individual to try to make sense and order out of the chaotic world we find ourselves in, and so that you have a frame of reference, and then two, have tools to help you move toward that ideal that frame of reference sets up. And I think that the reason why Christianity is so powerful as a religion is because the overriding idea in Christianity is that it is the responsibility of the individual to pursue to the greatest extent you possibly can, self-purification, purging all things that aren't adding to yourself, making yourself basically the best person you can be, right? That's why I think Jesus Christ is the most powerful figure in any story ever. And it's not because of in the mythos he's the son. I'll say the mythos just for vernacular. He's the son of God. It's because he represents what a human can be when they forgo all of those things that hold them back. And that's the reason why you're supposed to invite Jesus into your heart, is because you need to embody that. And when he's in your heart, then you have to be in alignment with that. If you're not in alignment with that, then he's not in your heart. And so the whole idea is it's a psychological trick for people to believe that, oh crap, I've got to live my life in the right way now that I've invited Jesus into my heart. Because if I don't make a good home for him, so to speak, then then he won't be there. And so it's really one of those ways that we as humans do this in all facets of life, where we fool ourselves about something to trick ourselves into doing what's better for us. And it's the ultimate way of doing that with your entire life. And I think that's why it's had such staying power as a religion and such, pervasiveness, and why you see even now, in Eastern Asia, it really coming to a rise is because, I think this is one of the most beautiful things about all of that. And this isn't. This has nothing to do with me wanting to see the spread of Christianity across the world, because that's not what I want to see per se. I want to see humans taking that responsibility for their own lives and realizing that the most important thing is for them to live the most virtuous life that they can. But I think that it's really special in Eastern Asia because there's so much of that culture that has given up who they are as an individual to that collective culture. And that's been very powerful for them as a culture, especially like you think about Japan and China, those two countries in particular, although even, South Korea and other places in that region. But let's just talk about particularly China and Japan. And let's just say specifically China, because that's even, I think, more... It is going to do more good for humanity in the long run if this continues in China than anywhere else in the world. That those individuals are starting to realize that, look, these overlords that we have, and let's make no mistake, they have overlords. These overlords that we have don't serve the end that's good for me as an individual. They don't even serve the end that's necessarily good for us as a Chinese society, or, and I'm not sure how China breaks down in all its different regions. So I'm sure they feel much more closely connected culturally in their regions than they do all of China, because China's one, a giant landmass, and two, giant population mass. And that's important. That's the thing that I think the people need to realize is important, is that building those strong regions, and which will decompose to strong cities, which will decompose to strong, communities, decompose to strong families, decompose to strong individuals. That's an integrated system. That's a system with literal integrity, right? You knock out one individual from that system's not going to fall down. But think about a dictatorship. You knock out that dictator, it's all gone, potentially, because then all his lieutenants are going to be fighting each other to be the dictator. That's why it's so important that I think it's so special and heartening that Christianity is starting to take hold in China and in the other, like I said, other places in that region, but specifically China, because the more that can happen, and I don't care that it's Christianity, even if it's pure libertarianism, right? Focus on that individual and the self-responsibility that comes with that, right? And that's just as important. I think you'll see that country really transforms itself into something amazing. And quite honestly, and this may be a little too, optimistic or rose-colored glasses, I really think that China can be the next United States. And I mean that in a way that the United States falls and China is the city on a hill country. Because if they have a revolution like that, they have so much personal integrity from a work ethic perspective, right? I mean, look how hard those people work. They have a huge integrity when it comes to family, even over there. So they have all of the structure there, except for that personal power they've given up to the overlords. If they take that back, you watch out. They're going to become very powerful. So, and I don't mean that from a political perspective. I mean that from a spiritual perspective. And that's, I think, the crux here. And this is the last I'll say on my little tirade on China. This is what I think is the crux of what needs to be realized by many people today, is that the human is a spiritual animal, and that can't be quantified by science and is way more important than any science we could ever do. I'm sorry, it is, right? Because the reality is we've got three things acting right now in the world at odds, and these things are really, truly at odds in a lot of different ways, but they have a lot of overlap and they have a lot of ways that they can come into alignment and help each other. And this is really funny because I'm going to break this down to something else in just a minute. Those three things are science, technology, which those two things are different. And we can have, I want to have an episode on how science and technology are at odds, because I think that that's important to point out. Science, technology, and spirituality. These three things are kind of like in a Mexican standoff, all pointing guns at each other. And it's like, what's going to win? Right now, technology is winning. And I think that's to our benefit that technology is winning over science, at least. But it's to our detriment that technology is losing to spiritual, or technology is over spirituality. We need spirituality at top, and then technology subservient to spirituality, and then science subservient to technology. Because if you flip science, then you're going to get weird stuff where it's like something that's like a result that two labs have gotten is going to start driving your society in a way that it's like, well, why are we even doing this? We don't even know the utility of this. It's just science told us, right? Mm-hmm. But when you put spirituality up top, then what's best for humans overrides it all. Anyway, those three things are at odds. What's really interesting, we have to get those three things integrated, and then we become the idealized society. Just the same as if you think about alchemical thought, the thoughts, your emotions, and your actions. The three different constituents of the alchemical process, the Hermes Trismegistus alchemical process. You align those three things within the individual, then you have the idealized individual. Well, we're just playing this up at the higher level as well with society. And everything's fractal like that in life, which is really, really weird. And that's another thing I want to have an episode on, is how everything in life is fractal. And it's like chaos, the fractal part of chaos theory, where everything breaks down to just the same constituents at every low level, no matter how low of a level you get down to the atoms, you get down to protons, you get down to quarks, you get down to gluons, you get down to, all that kind of stuff at that low of a level. And it's all the same all the way down. There's three big things that have to come into alignment to work together to make things really successful at whatever level you're looking at. Anyway, that's gotten very esoteric and maybe off the beaten path here.
No, I don't think it's off the beaten path. I think it's a more macro view of some of the things we've been focused on, and it helps to me to clarify the back down to the fundamental individual, the meaning part of it.
Yeah.
Right. Because that then is the epitome, which you just described is the epitome of why meaning matters at the individual level, right? Because it's not about we didn't say the individual has to get a scientific foundation, or they don't have to have a technological foundation. They don't have to have anything. They have to have a meaning foundation.
Right.
They have to come from a place of meaning,
right,
which is the spirituality part that you talked about. And so without that being the guiding force, everything is because meaning, and again, it goes to the point we're talking, meaning based on sincerity and genuineness and truth, or as close as we can get to truth, the absoluteness of truth. Beginning with that, the others, science and technology, are not anywhere in that ballpark. They are, as you said, subordinate and supportive of truth and spirituality. So anyway, this sounds like a really good spot for us to pause till the next time. I think you've in some of your discussions have come up with 2 or 3 or 4 really good other topics for us to chew on in future podcasts. These things are getting to me funner and funner, more fun, whatever the appropriate comparative is or superlative.
Understood.
Funnest. Because they're getting to be whether or not they're real, right? A lot of our conversations up to this point have been very philosophical, and we both love philosophical conversations.
Yeah.
But sometimes those philosophical conversations have to be connected to meaning, have to be connected to life, to execution, or what are
They're
they
useless,
worth?
completely useless.
That's right. And so I think this was probably one of the deepest, most connecting discussions we've had in that realm, and we didn't sacrifice our philosophy conversations to make the connection points, and I really like that. So I think well done on your part. I appreciate your intellect and your depth of understanding. As I've said many times, I'm the elder of the 2 of us, but I learn every time we have conversations, and I appreciate that so much. So
Of course.
and enjoy them so much as well. So
Same. It's for me, these kinds of things just rattle around in my brain all the time, and it's really helpful, clarifying, and cathartic to be able to have someone to lend me their ear on it. So I really appreciate you doing that.
well, it sure doesn't sound like they're rattling. It sounds like they're forming and maturing into thoughts and into dissertations, if you will. So you do well in your catharsis of getting it out, forming of it. So, all right, sir. We started this discussion differently than the ones in the past, and I think it actually gave it some new energy. I really do. I think it launched it in a new and amazing way. So I kind of think that we may have found something that may be helpful for us going forward.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm very energized by this, and as always, Bill, I appreciate your time, and definitely enjoyed the conversation.
All right, same here. Until next time.
All right, we'll see you.